CityCast Boise is sponsored by local author David Tuttle. David Tuttle, a U.S. Army veteran and Reiki master, has completed his most recent book, Soul License, Tips and Tales. It's a spellbinding adventure of a man traveling his spiritual path with guidance from beings of the so-called other dimension. In Soul License, Tips and Tales, Tuttle explores the metaphysical. He shares insights into understanding how to live a peaceful life. Soul License, Tips and Tales is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers.
Today on CityCast Boise, all eyes are on the Capitol as lawmakers inch toward wrapping up the session. But did you know that Boise kind of robbed the State House from Lewiston? We're resharing our December chat with reporter Jimmy Dawson about why some North Idahoans are still feeling a little testy about this heist. It's Tuesday, March 28th. I'm Emma Arnold, and this is what Boise's talking about. Hi, Jimmy. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Emma. Good to be back.
I hope you did some deep breathing before this episode and you're ready to get into it, because I'm wondering, do you feel like you're betraying your hometown by living in the city that stole its capital? Because that's what we're going to talk about.
Trust me, it definitely bubbles up a whole lot of anger within me whenever I think about it. But it's true. Like, I grew up, 18 years being like, Boise. Also, we call it Boise up there, just so y'all know, and that's how it should be pronounced.
I mean, it's very controversial. We've talked about it on the show before, but I say Boise. I say Boise on air so that I don't get shouted at, but mostly I say Boise, so I do the same thing. No problem. So let's talk about it. In 1863, Lewiston became Idaho's first territorial capital. And how did that happen?
Yeah, so a lot of people came over. We should obviously say this was, Nez Perce land. They had a whole lot of land in sort of north central Idaho. Then you had like southern Washington and northern Oregon. And then you had white settlers come in after the Corps of Discovery with Lewis and Clark. But they came here mostly to try to get gold. They were mining gold up in kind of that Pierce area further up the Clearwater from Lewiston. And it was kind of like a central location where eventually you would have steamboats running up and down to try to move like farming, crops, whatever, to move that further toward the ocean.
Yeah. So a lot of people started, moving in because of the gold and the farming. But by 1864, Boise became the capital and it was moved.
It was moved. I say it was stolen because it literally was stolen. So this is still, you got to keep in mind, this is still territorial days. So Idaho was not a state. And originally that Lewiston area in northern Idaho was part of the Washington Territory, technically. But with the gold rush up here kind of not being so much of a gold rush, and when I say up here, I mean Lewiston and that whole Clearwater area, they found more gold and more, valuable things to mine down in like kind of the Idaho City area and, the Treasure Valley, really. And so that's where all the people went. The people down in Boise were like, well, we got more people now, and why aren't we the capital? We should be the capital. And so when I spoke to Stephen Branting, who's kind of like a local historian, he was big in the Lewiston education scene back when I was still going to school. He was telling me how there was literally a territorial seal and some papers designating Lewiston as the capital. And, they saw what was coming, that the Boise contingent was going to, try to move the capital, and they put those documents and stuff into the Lewiston City Jail, kind of locked it in a safe. And then Clinton DeWitt Smith, who was kind of the territorial secretary, he named himself acting governor and brought federal troops with him to kind of seize all of that. He broke into the jail, he broke the lock, grabbed all the papers, and then whipped out of town on a ferry back to Boise to install the new capital there.
So not just you who felt like it was stolen, kind of a pretty broad opinion there.
I mean, legitimately. But then, of course, in 1866, you've got the Territorial Supreme Court basically saying, nah, that's cool. That's fine. We're not going to write an opinion, but yeah, that was legal. It's cool.
So it sounds super messy, and it sounds like the politics behind the act of the territorial legislature also got like pretty wild, didn't it?
Yeah, they weren't. I mean, the people up in North Idaho and North Central Idaho, they really weren't down with, what they saw as kind of usurpers coming and taking that power away from them, and so much so that like. It was bitter for decades afterwards. The people who live up there back in the day even lobbied Congress to make them part of the Washington Territory again. They're like, yeah, okay, well, if we're going to have this capital, hundreds of miles south of us, it's completely different. Different culture, different priorities, things like that. We'll just go into Washington. And the House and Senate in the 1880s, I believe, passed that bill. But the acting governor of Idaho, the territory of Idaho, I guess, was really good friends with Grover Cleveland, the president at the time. And he's just like, yeah, keep that in your drawer. Don't sign this. Please do not sign this. And he didn't. So that's why, northern Idaho is still part of Idaho.
Oh, wow. Thanks to Grover Cleveland. So you grew up in Lewiston, and is this something your teachers taught growing up? Because I didn't know any of this until I was an adult. And was it a big part of your Idaho's history lectures growing up?
The details, not so much, but I always knew from a fairly young age, because I would always see the sign Idaho's territorial capital, Lewiston, welcome to Lewiston. Mm-hmm. And I would ask my parents about it. And my dad, of course, he's just like, yep, they stole it from us. Boise stole it.
So people are still salty up there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Most people in North Idaho could tell you about this fact and maybe would be salty still.
Maybe. I would say in the Lewiston area specifically. Yeah. I don't know how much play it gets, if you go to Coeur d'Alene.
Staying out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they'll be their own, readout area up there.
Yeah, it's funny. I just think it's interesting that most people from southern Idaho don't even know about this part of our history. It usually takes someone like you from North Idaho bringing it up. So why do you think that is?
I think it's, partially geographical. I hadn't even ever been to Boise until I was in high school, just because it was the same distance driving from Lewiston to Portland or Seattle. So it's okay, why would I go to Boise when I could go to Portland or Seattle? Yeah. Not that Boise doesn't have lovely things here, but, bigger city, more things to do in Portland and Seattle at the time. So I don't know. I think there's that big geographical distance. And even think about it back then, too. Sure, it takes 5-6 hours to drive nowadays, but we're talking days and maybe even weeks back in the 1800s, right? Before, there might have been total railroad connectivity. We're talking wagons or people on foot even.
I'm curious what was going through your head, young Jimmy's head when you saw Boise for the first time. Did you think, oh, the big city, I'm going to live here someday? Were you impressed? What did you think?
No, I think that I was mostly just because I came down for a journalism conference, and I think it was at the Riverside in Garden City. So not even technically Boise, which is funny because I didn't really realize that at the time. But I didn't really have any impressions because we just stayed at the hotel.
It's funny because a lot of my, not northern, but Salmon, Lemhi County family, they consider Boise to be such a big city. And when they drive through, they're just oh my gosh, it's so stressful. It's horrible. I can't wait to get back up to the country. And so I, growing up, thought Boise was a really big city. Until I actually went to a big city and was like, oh, we're a town. I've got it.
You mean where you actually had to spend $20 or $30 a day to park somewhere instead of $2 downtown a block away, and you still complain about having to walk?
Yeah, exactly. Or you actually had to look for parking, and I was like, this is a madhouse. It's what do we do?
Yes.
Well, let's imagine life with Lewiston as the capital. What do you think that would look like?
I think it'd look really weird. I don't know. I've lived in another state capital that had about as many people as Lewiston. I lived in Dover, Delaware for 5 years after college. And I don't know. It's kind of goofy. Like people there don't really even think of it as a capital city.
Kind of like Salem, like, not that Salem's super tiny, but I know whenever I've performed in Salem, Oregon, people in Portland are always kind of like, oh, okay, well, but they shouldn't be the capital, obviously. Like Portland is salty that Salem is the capital. So I imagine if Lewiston was the capital, Boise would probably be like, come on.
Oh, totally. Because we have far more people down here in Boise than there are in Lewiston. I mean, we're talking like 35,000 people. Not to mention that, like, when I asked Stephen Branting that question, when I interviewed him, I was like, do you wish that Lewiston was the capital? And he's like, no, absolutely not, because he likes getting somewhere in 3 minutes. And it's true. Like, sure, Lewiston's like spread out geographically a little bit, so 3 minutes is a little bit of an exaggeration. But rush hour is like you'll get somewhere 5 minutes later. It's not like Boise where you're waiting, light after light after light if you're on Myrtle or Front.
Mm-hmm. What about you? If Lewiston was the capital, would you be there as a political reporter? Would you be in Lewiston?
I don't know. It's kind of weird because I grew up there. Not that I want to dunk on Lewiston too much, but I like that there's more to do down here. But if Lewiston had been the capital for, 100 plus years or whatever, who's to say that, we wouldn't have just as many people up there?
Yeah, true. What's your favorite thing about Lewiston?
I think it's gorgeous up there. I mean, the hills aren't as tall as they are here in Boise with the foothills, but they're almost more dramatic because you go from like 500, 600 feet, above sea level, like right at the confluence of the Snake and Clearwater. And then you just kind of jut up straight like 2,000 feet. If you go south of town, up the Snake, then you can see some like Native American pictographs that are, 10,000 years old or whatever. And that's really fun. And you're really close to a lot of other great outdoors spaces. Other than that, there are a few good restaurants. I'll give it that.
Do you get upset when people talk about the smell?
No, because I understand it.
Yeah. I mean, because it can be shocking. I mean, if you didn't grow up around there, to drive out into town for the first time and smell that can be kind of shocking.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, all the kids on sports teams who would come from, Coeur d'Alene or whatever, it's just like, oh, it's the armpit of Idaho. And it does smell, I am used to it, obviously, even though I haven't lived there for several years. I don't notice it that much. And it has gotten better since I was a kid, that's for sure. But it was doubly like pretty gnarly when we had the composting facility up on the top of the hill, and then you would have Potlatch, kind of the smell go up the river down by Main Street, and then the composting facility would just go down and settle, especially in the summer when it's like 110 degrees outside. It was pretty rank.
What a bouquet. You really did a great description of that. Well, Jimmy, thanks for coming on and letting us know about this interesting Idaho fact. And I'll think of you the next time I drive through Lewiston and see that beautiful view and hold my breath the whole way.
Plug your nose. Yes, please. Thanks.
One more thing before we sign off. There was a lot of excitement last May when the Antiques Roadshow came to Boise to record us digging through our family heirlooms and treasures. Now the show is just about to air 3 episodes filmed right here at the Idaho Botanical Garden. The episodes are on Idaho Public Television at 7 p.m. on April 3rd, 10th, and 17th, or you can watch them on the PBS app or online at video.idahoptv.org. According to the Idaho Statesman, a few of the treasures include Italian haute couture, basketball cards, comic books, oil paintings, and Idaho State gems and gold nuggets found in 1905. That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend? Leave us a review and subscribe to our Hey Boise newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more local stories from around the city. Bye.